For Driving Change, this is Matthew Bishop, and today I'm talking with Bill Haseltine, who has lived an extraordinary life and has much more life still to live that I think will be extraordinary, but has just written an autobiography, My Lifelong Fight Against Disease, which is a recommended read to anyone that wants to know really about how science, in particular science around medicine, could really provide both a fulfilling life, but also a life which really can make a difference and help the world move to a better place. Among the many things that Bill has done is create several companies, startup companies that have gone on to great success, and also he has launched Access Health, which is a very influential non-profit trying to change policy around health. And for me, he's been particularly invaluable during this whole COVID pandemic by producing a sort of torrent of incredibly wise and well-informed analysis of much of the misinformed stuff that's out there in the media, so that I think we have a much better sense of, I certainly felt I had a really reliable guide through the crisis. He's written, including, as you can see behind him, a book called A COVID Back to School Guide, which again is a much very, very helpful guide to any parent thinking about whether it's safe to send their kid back to school and what sort of questions they should be asking. But we are talking today just after the announcement that Pfizer and a German company have come up with a vaccine against COVID-19 that has caused a sort of a surge in their stock price and widespread celebration because it shows some efficacy. And Bill, as usual, you've been sort of evaluating some of those claims and have taken a more skeptical view. Where do you feel we are in this race for a vaccine that we all desperately want to succeed?
What we have seen is a disrespect for science. At the same time, a deep hunger for science and for rationally based medicine. And it's ever more important and will continue to be so. And I am very grateful that you're giving me and others the opportunity to talk about it. In fact, that's why I wrote the book. I wrote this autobiography. The primary motive is to encourage young people to become scientists, to show that it is a very fulfilling life. It's a area where one person and their efforts and their mind can make a difference in the entire world. You know, I'm rewriting it now for kids 10 to 15, and the title is going to be Science is a Superpower. And it is a superpower because one person can change the world. You think of Louis Pasteur, you think of Jim Watson and Francis Crick, you think of Salk and Sabin that changed my life as a child. One person can change the world. And it's a great feeling. And even if you don't change the whole world, you can make it a better place. And it can be a very rewarding life. And I think that I applaud you for your lifelong dedication to understanding what's happening in science and medicine. And also this particular incarnation where you're taking advantage of new media. Now, to your specific question, I just wrote a little essay about the backstory of the Pfizer vaccine. And like all great scientific breakthroughs, it has a deep backstory. The first is massive US funding of biomedical research for a period of 50 or 60 years. And that's been my whole career. And it's funded this really deep knowledge of viruses, of material sciences. And then there's that spark of genius, Bob Langer, who has contributed to so many new inventions by applying biomaterials to medical problems. In this case, how to package RNA in a way that it can get into cells and do its work. Decades and decades of work and success and failure. Bob and I, in fact, started a company together to make vaccines more potent. He finally found a better way to do it than the way we were doing it. But it's really decades of work. And then combining that with the power of a very sophisticated financial system that we have, take ideas from universities and move them forward through venture capital, through initial public offerings. I've been involved in that, and it's a system we don't create, but we use And again, in enlightened legislation, it says there's a positive obligation for universities to transfer intellectual property to the private sector. It's a whole story which is behind this Pfizer announcement. Now, whether that turns out to be the answer to COVID-19 or not, it's a great story. And it will be maybe part of the answer. What do we know from the specific announcement? Well, very little, because we don't see the data yet. I'm all for speeding out work on COVID-19, but I'm not for making announcements where you don't have the data to analyze. I love what's happened with publication, that journals now allow you to publish an unreviewed preprint and still won't knock you out of the box for publication later. That's good communication because you can see the data. I'd love to have seen the Pfizer data. All we can rely upon at this point is the reputation of the CEO and of the company to believe that what they tell us is correct. But when you look a little deeper, and you look at the protocols, you realize the vaccine they're trying to make doesn't prevent infection, may not prevent most serious disease or death, and may not really prevent transmission. Those are things everybody wants from a vaccine. It might be like the flu vaccine. That's, I think, what it's looking like. Everybody in their trial got infected. There seemed to be a difference, according to the announcement, between those infected that were vaccinated and those infected who were not vaccinated. But how big the difference is, what the symptoms were, we're left to guess, and we need to know. I'll point something else out that most people would probably not realize, and that is, if you are infected immediately after your last vaccine boost, which people were in this trial, you're not actually measuring the vaccine. You're measuring the antibodies to the antigen you put into the people. A vaccine is actually recalling memory from an experience you've had some time ago, not pumping up your antibodies because you pumped in the antigens. You make an antibody response, and then you immediately challenge. So we wait to see whether this will actually induce a memory response, which is what we depend upon for antibody protection or our vaccine protection. So there's a lot of, I would say, unanswered questions. All of that being said, this is good news. It's anything but bad news. It's good news. We just don't know how good a news it is yet.
And my sense is, looking at how the world has responded to this pandemic, that many of the actions have been, ill-considered, poorly executed, and really they've not learned much from the lessons of history. The vaccine side, however, and the effort to find both treatments and vaccines seems to me to have been a much more impressive effort, and one that really we should be proud of, and one that has a reasonable chance of succeeding far faster than anyone would have imagined. Am I right in that assessment?
This is absolutely reminiscent of HIV/AIDS. The medical and scientific world was excoriated for about 4 or 5 years for not paying attention to AIDS. The band played on by Randy Shilts and other books really took the whole apparatus to task. And it wasn't fair in one respect. It was fair for public health policy. It was fair for the government. It was fair for the CDC and Human Health and Human Services in the US and most other government agencies. It was not true of science. Science got right to work, identified the virus, and is fast and even faster than we thought possible. Found drugs, diagnostics, other tools to deal with this disease. The same thing has happened here. I can tell you the response to this pandemic in Western countries and in Southeast Asia has been abysmal. It has been beyond bad. And you don't have to look to history. You can look to China, a country of 1.4 billion people that has no infections. 3 weeks ago, 650 million Chinese traveled all over the country without a single infection. So don't criticize them that basically are free. They could go to theaters without masks. Their restaurants are packed. They have huge parties with no problem. That's the reality of China. Now, the only thing they can't do is go outside their country because it's a COVID-filled world. And they're very careful about people coming in. The lesson, you can control this disease with public health measures alone. Why in hell do people say, I don't believe it, when it's before their very eyes? That is, one of the things that is hard for a scientist, and you've probably seen this many times, is belief trumps facts every time. Belief is more powerful. The way I describe the human mind is always emotional, sometimes rational. And it's the emotions that cloud our vision so we can't see reality. We can't see that this is totally controllable. And instead, we in the West are relying on science. Well, science can contribute, but not like a movie where it happens overnight. We put AIDS partially back in the bottle, and we may be getting it finally, so that there's one shot protects you for 4 or 5 months from getting HIV. Good. 40 years later, 35 years later, it can solve problems, but it takes a long time. Now, shorter than that, people have been living. And you're seeing this science do its job. Science is mobilized. I'm really proud of what we've been able to do. And I have to say, the Trump administration has put its hope in science, not in public health. That's deeply misplaced. You got to do both to control this pandemic. And a lot of people are going to die because of that very poor decision.
But you feel that some things were done right, even by the Trump administration in this respect?
Absolutely, they were done right to pour tons of money. However, by trying to twist these rules, I call it warping the regulatory process in the warp speed effort, has done nobody any good, because that just builds distrust. We've got to have things done by the book. And the Pfizer vaccine announcement was not done by the book. And people stand to profit enormously from some of these announcements, and it's just not right.
How much do you think? To what extent were efforts like Bill Gates and others, have they been important in getting this vaccine strategy as far and as quickly as it's come?
I think they've been very important. I think that Gates is right in the sense that vaccines are the best things, the magic bullets we have to help everybody in the world. My foundation, Access Health, works on access to high quality affordable care. Why did I pick that area? Because after seeing the great promise of genomics and all the things we can do to bring new medicines to market, and even bringing some medicines and even older medicines to solve ancient problems, the problem turns out to be delivery. You can't get it to where it's needed. There's tremendous inequities in healthcare services, and so bad that even if you've got a magic drug to solve a problem, you can't deliver it to those people who need it. I've actually had personal experience with that, with visceral leishmaniasis, having a drug that would solve it, but not having an infrastructure that could deliver it. That's very disappointing. And Gates works on both of those things. But vaccines are different. Vaccines can be administered globally by an international organization, regardless of the underlying infrastructure. That's the difference. An international agency can sweep through, and that's how we got rid of smallpox. It's how we're about to get rid of polio. And a number of other diseases can be handled that way. Vaccines are the best thing we can have. And in fact, the Pfizer vaccine, one of the engines behind that is the Gates Foundation, that put their bet and their effort into these brand new vaccine technologies, which Pfizer has used. So I think they've done a great service and are doing a great service.
So I guess one of the issues that will, come to the top of the political agenda globally, once a vaccine is clearly effective enough to be distributed, is equitable distribution. And clearly from Access Health's perspective, that's a huge challenge. It seems like there's not going to be enough produced in the next 12 months of whatever vaccine is successful to get it to everyone. So how do we handle this? Well,
the way you handle it is the way we the Gates Foundation and others handle the vaccine situation and the AIDS drug situation. And actually, I was involved directly with the AIDS drug situation. You have it made in India. You have it made cheaply, very cheaply, like 1/100th the price. For example, when AIDS treatments were costing $50,000, $60,000, $100,000 a year, the Gates Foundation came up with $100 a year solution. Why? Because some of my friends in India told them what the actual manufacturing costs of the raw materials and drugs were. And that allowed them to negotiate with the final people who were producing the pill. And instead of $100,000, it was $100 a pill. And now it's even less than that. And the Indians are capable of producing very large amounts of vaccine. They produce 2/3 of the world's vaccine, mostly for low-income countries. I actually go to India when I could go to India. I was going 3 or 4 times a year for my foundation. I would buy my drugs there at 1/10 to 1/100th the price that I buy them here. Same drug, same company, just about making the raw ingredients. So I think we can rely. There is a system set up. Now, the problem with some of these vaccines, like the Pfizer vaccine, is totally unsuitable for the poorer countries because of the cold chain requirement. The other vaccines that are unsuitable are the adenovirus vaccines. Why? Because once you give them, you can't give them again. And if it looks like this is going to be like influenza, where you're going to need a booster pretty often, those vaccines aren't going to work. So the killed vaccines, the subunit vaccines, a couple of other types of vaccines that are being developed are much more likely to be able to be used very widely than these really high technology vaccines. So I think that we will have solutions, but I think it's been 3 or 4 years before those are really widely available and can be produced in quantity. They will come, but it's not going to be immediate.
So I want to pick up on the point you made about China. So I guess one of the critiques that Western politicians have made in their own defense of China is obviously that it has a somewhat different view of people's privacy and their ability to have freedoms in all sorts of ways that we take for granted here, and that sort of approach couldn't be taken in the West. What do you think about that?
Quarantines were invented by the Venetians. As far as I remember, Venetians are Westerners. In fact, we regard them as some of the highest flower of our civilization and one of the origins of the Renaissance, with all their classical roots and their wonderful Baroque way of life. And they invented quarantine. What's a quarantine? If a ship comes into harbor and somebody's sick, leave it there for 40 days till everybody dies. And those that survive can come ashore. Or if there's a plague in a city, close the whole damn thing down for 40 days until everybody dies. We know how to do it. We have the laws to do it. Emergency power gives us the power to do it. Why didn't we exercise it? Well, it's not, the Romans figured it out long ago. Public health is the greatest good. The demand for public health trumps every other right that we have. We restrict our rights to drive while drunk, to even smoke in restaurants today because it harms other people. Surely we have the power to control behavior that can kill hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of our fellow citizens. We do have the power. We choose not to use it. We don't have the leadership. And when I actually look at this, and I'm now looking long-term, I'm thinking about what a COVID commission, like the 9/11 commission, would look like. Well, they're going to have to examine leadership. They're going to have to examine governance. They're going to have to examine all the laws and how they're enforced. They're going to have to look at federalism versus provincialism. There's a series of real questions we've got to look at. We obviously have blown it. China is 0 infections. America heading to 200,000 a day, or let's say China 10 and America 200,000. I mean, what? How can that be? Well, that
interestingly, Western Europe has been as bad.
Western Europe is just as bad in all of South America and South Asia. It's just people not learning the lessons. Now, you can say, well, in South America and South Asia, they don't have the organization. Government isn't well organized. Well, is that true of Germany or France? That's going through these horrible, if there is an example of a government that functions, it's France, right? Or Germany. Look at what's happening. Or Spain even. Those are good governments. They deliver good services. They failed here. And they didn't fail because they respected human rights. I think their failure is a disrespect for our right to live. That's what it actually is, masquerading as some other kind of freedom. And by blowing it the first time, they lost their credibility for the second and the third time. This virus is going to be endemic. It's coming back again and again and again to get us, just like it's cold viruses does. It's not going to go away. We may have a vaccine, but we're going to be in a flu-like situation where every year this guy comes back. So they are blowing their credibility. They blew it originally, and it's hard to get it back. Mm. Bill has a solution, okay, for us freedom-loving Americans. Mm. It's, first of all, make tests free for everybody, these rapid antigen tests. Everybody gets them. And you test yourself and your family as often as you want, at least twice a week. And your businesses get it and your schools get it, so they can confirm. Then you offer people $500 a day to stay home with their family if they're infected. You verify that they're infected before you fork over the money, but you keep them at home and you give them enough money so it compensates, and you pass laws that if the wife is not infected and has to stay home, she gets her job back. That's the kind of thing we have to do. That is something I think we can go for.
And what sort of fraction of the cost would that be?
When I look at it, I think you can put the genie back in its bottle in about 3 or 4 months. I think it's no more than $200 billion for the U.S. Even at twice that, it's a deal compared to the 16 trillion we're already in the hole and going deeper. We don't know how deep we're going to have to go, but 16 trillion is a conservative estimate, not even counting the value of the life's loss, which is another $20 trillion, something like that. So we're losing a lot, and I don't think it's going to cost us that much. It may even cost half of that. So I think we can do it. Doing what the Chinese did, they actually had mandatory isolation for everybody who was exposed. We can do better by saying everybody who's potentially contagious because they're antigen positive. That's a much smaller number. And we're not saying stay at home by order. We're giving them an incentive to make it possible for them to take care of their families and stay home. So I think and I also think we need an app that says, yeah, I'm clear, or yes, I'm infected. So I think that's Bill's solution for our Western mentality. But it's taking the essence of what the Chinese have done and doing it here in face of this terrible pandemic we've got.
So I think part of the challenge that you obviously note in your book is we don't live in a culture that really respects science, and I think in the current Western populism phase that we're going through, it's very hard for governments to use scientific facts to persuade people to behave coherently, so in sensible ways in their own self-interest. And that's probably why you're offering them money to stay home, because money is the one thing that people do still seem to understand in a rational way to some extent. But I mean, how far do you feel that's been a huge problem in terms of?
I think that in the average person's mind, there's a dichotomy. When I look around, on the one hand, they're very grateful for the benefits that science and technology have given them. They're very grateful for the medicines. They're very grateful for the communications technologies. And in fact, they're even grateful for the low prices that globalism and modern life gives them. Because, when I think about what I used to pay for a television, what I have to pay now, for example, I can't believe what you can buy for so little today. And that's because of globalism. So I think people are grateful for that. I think they're very worried about something else, which is erosion of the way they live. Do they have respect from their jobs? What is the role of a man in society versus the role of women? Does a man get respect for his work or not? Does he get respect for his family? What are the role of women and what kind of opportunities they have? So I think that there's a cognitive dissonance. Even if you look at the Trump administration, on the one hand, dismissing the public health measures, on the other hand, putting massive efforts, billions of dollars through BARDA a whole apparatus that I helped to build in a way to work on control of diseases, whether they're man-made or of natural origin. That's the tool that this administration has pumped all this money in, and really has pumped tens of billions into trying to find a medical solution. So even there, where you have somebody who is identified as anti-science, he's not actually anti-science. He's anti-public health, okay? And he's for science. That's kind of an odd position to say, that you have a president who doesn't seem to be for science, but actually practically has been for science. You know, looking at the AIDS situation, my book opens up with a whole chapter of how we had to basically lie and twist and get money for HIV/AIDS research. And
there's a rather hilarious anecdote. There's a hilarious anecdote with you and Elizabeth Taylor and some congressmen. I guess.
That's right. Where I actually had to tell, I would call it a white lie, to get the first $360 million to $320 million for extra AIDS research. Just wasn't coming, and Elizabeth helped me get it. And that was really got the whole ball rolling. You know, the other thing about science that you have to understand, you can't do science without money. And another motive for creating Access Health was to realize that healthcare costs are rising so fast in the United States that they're undermining every other social service. They're undermining our military, in fact, our military readiness. They're undermining our international competitiveness in business and this cost of goods, because healthcare has to be built into that. And they're eventually going to undermine our ability to find new medical solutions, because people are going to say, hey, all these solutions, and you're breaking the bank. To hell with these new solutions. Let's just use what we've got. And that would be death for us. And that's one of the reasons I focus on high quality, affordable care. You know, I wrote a book called Affordable Excellence, showing how Singapore gives much better medicine than we do, as advanced or more advanced for their citizens at 1/4 the price. If you look along the Pacific Rim, the countries will tell you, and I've been in meetings, say, it's easy to control the cost, Bill. You just control the price. That's what we do. Duh. Control the cost by controlling price. Ever hear that in medicine? No, you don't hear that here. But I formed my foundation to look at what could be done. And my other book, which is called World Class, examines a hospital system in the United States that actually gets exceedingly good results at a much lower cost, and therefore a greater surplus to reinvest in doing it even better. That's NYU Langone. And we can do it here. We don't have to depend only on the government. We have to look at our own institutions. And the other thing for biomedical research, as they improve patient care, so too did they do biomedical research. When they started 10 years before, they were in bad shape. They were losing federal grant support. 12 years later, they had more dollars per capita than any university in the United States from the NIH per researcher. More dollars per capita. That's applying rational, behavior for science. That book is, I think people don't pay attention very much to the science part of it, but it is the only good example I found in contemporary life where people manage science rationally, productively, for absolutely excellent results. And not only is it a lesson how to manage your patient care, your education, by the way, which is now free, but also your biomedical research. You can manage it so it's much more productive than most universities do.
So I have two more questions to ask before we close that are related. The first is about the anti-vax movement and what we do about that, because when we do have a vaccine, it seems like there will be a lot of people that say, well, we can't trust it, we shouldn't take it. How do we counter that movement? Well,
the first thing is our president is a big vaxxer now. He was an anti-vaxxer before. It's very peculiar to see him saying, I'm going to save you through a vaccine. But that's what he says. That's good news, because a lot of the anti-vaxxers are the same people that are Trump supporters. maybe a judicial flip would be to work with him as a pro spokesperson saying, hey, you may no longer be president, but you brought us these vaccines. Let's have you promote these vaccines, right? Why don't you promote it as you being the savior? Maybe he'll use that to run for president again. That's a double-edged sword, in my opinion, but it's an idea for how we approach the anti-vaxxers, because again, the anti-vaxxers are reacting emotionally. There are some people who distorted facts very badly. There are certainly some side effects and nasty effects of some vaccines. We have to recognize that. And then we have to look at the benefits versus the risks. But this warp speed that has raised a lot of questions over the processes, like, are you really going to inspect the factories? The fact that the FDA say we're not going to inspect the factories is so shocking to me, I can hardly believe it. Because that's the only way you know they're safe. And we know that this Eli Lilly drug that has just been approved was made in a factory that concealed records, safety records, and was shut down. Now they're demanding that, of course, it be inspected. So those are fundamental questions we've got to get right. But I think the anti-vax movement is one you can handle if you're careful and you have the right spokespeople. But, it's not just in the United States. If you talk to any of the international organizations that deliver vaccines, they will say at least half or more of their work is working with local community leaders who are respected in the communities to speak on behalf of the vaccine. Because it's not natural all over the world I have some ideas of specific places, but you've got to find, it's a lot of effort. It's not a little effort to get people to accept something they may not think is right. And the way you do that is you work at a community level. You can't work at a level above the community if you want belief. You're trying to change belief. And you don't change belief through rationality. Belief is supra-rational. It's above rationality. So you've got to work at the level of belief, and that has to be done through trust.
So to finish up, we started with you talking about your mission to encourage more people to take up science and live a life and career driven by science. If you were a policymaker today, in government around the world, are there practical things you could do to encourage more people into science?
I don't think we should underestimate presidential leadership. And I came to consciousness during the Eisenhower years, the Sputnik years, the Kennedy years, and even the Johnson years. And they were so pro-science. All our science curricula were rewritten. There was tremendous incentives. My book is really a story, not just of me, but of the society opening one door in front of me as I went through my path. Whether that door was a new physics and chemistry program in high school, whether that door was special programs for science-oriented, whether it was senior professors fishing into that sea of 3,000 chemistry students to find a couple of likely fish that could become scientists, whether it was Harvard creating a program for people who wanted to go from physics and chemistry into biology, whether it was postdoctoral fellowships or startup grants for young professors or new facilities to do work with biohazardous materials. Everywhere along the path, whether it was the Bayh-Dole Act and venture capitalists opening the money to help me create companies, all of that is people opening doors for this path. That's what you need. Kids are trying to figure out, how am I going to get on in the world? And if they see an open door, they're going to head that direction. And so our society has to do all the things I just mentioned. Each chapter in the book that I've written about my life could really be seen as somebody opening a door for me. And I hope I can open a door for a few others that come after me.
And you feel that there are a whole lot of doors that could be created that aren't there at the moment?
Absolutely. Starting with the president saying, science is where we have to go. You know, one of my good friends, actually, this book is also inspired by Abdul Kalam. And you probably don't remember who he is, but he was the president of India, a tiny Muslim from an unbelievably poor background, rising up, become the president of India. That's kind of a figurehead job, but nonetheless is an important position. His entire life was devoted to science. And when I knew him, he did everything he could to open the doors of science for people. Every laboratory I would go to, every biotech company, every pharma company, there was a plaque. Abdul Kalam was here opening it up. He wrote like 6 books for kids to help them become interested in science. Most people may know him as India's rocket man. He was also their atomic bomb man. So he was a very interesting character, one of the most interesting characters. But he helped that whole continent. He and a good friend of mine, Ram Mashalkar, who was both science secretary, came up with the words knowledge economy. That's the way they were thinking, a knowledge economy. And these 2 guys did really what was being done in the US under Eisenhower and Kennedy for young people. And the result in India has been spectacular. And it's benefited us because a lot of those young people are now running our tech industry. The ones from India that they inspired. We're doing very well from those gentlemen. And I hope that we can return the favor.
Well, on that note, Bill Haseltine, thank you so much for talking with Driving Change. It's been a pleasure.
It's my pleasure, Matthew, and keep up your great work.
Thank you.